I think that DeFi is definitely the most popular use case. So we talked to a lot of Bitcoin holders and investors. I think by far the number one thing that people want to do with their Bitcoin is to borrow against it so that they can
Mm,
access fiat, either to access leverage or to um, just be able to have dollars and not have to incur a capital gains event for it, right? So maybe they want to borrow against their Bitcoin to purchase real estate or some other real assets with it. And so I think that lending and borrowing is going to be a important first use case. We're looking at a lot of opportunities for new yield generation on Bitcoin.
Welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, my guest is Andre from Stacks.
So I spent 2 years at the Stacks Foundation. Just recently moved over to Bitcoin L2 Labs. So it's a company that's focused on core product development for the Stacks blockchain. So I'm the head of
Okay.
product there. The first thing that you need to know, right, is that Stacks is a decentralized ecosystem. And so we actually have a smaller foundation than many other crypto projects, right? Um, and so Bitcoin L2 Labs is a company that's set up to focus specifically on core product development. So we are building sBTC, which is a way to use Bitcoin in DeFi via the Stacks network. I'm sure we'll talk about that today. And then any other sort of upgrades to the core Stacks network itself.
How would you respond, I guess, to the saying that Stacks is like probably the biggest Bitcoin L2 aside from Lightning Network?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. When you look at metrics like total value locked, developer activity, developer traction, um, yeah, I think that we've benefited from being early builders in this space. Our mainnet launched in January of 2021, so we've been able to build up a lot of traction in this category.
Amazing. Would you say that Stacks is a side chain of Bitcoin, similar to like Liquid Network or RSK or something like that?
That's a good question. I think that the difference that I would call here is that Stacks is actually inheriting security from the Bitcoin L1. I think that's a key difference from like side chains and layer two models. We can go into more of the difference of what exactly we mean by that. Um, I think that in general, one of the things that we look at in terms of like, is a protocol a layer two, is does it have this feature of unilateral exit?
Mm-hmm.
And so other than Lightning, no other protocol has this capability yet today, but Stacks has made a lot of progress in developing a decentralized representation of Bitcoin on Stacks. And so instead of the Bitcoin bridge being maintained by one central custodian, we've developed a decentralized network of validators that are responsible for basically the flow of Bitcoin into and out of the protocol. And so in terms of L2 models, there's a little bit of nuance there. But I think it's certainly, when you look at the decentralization of the bridge and inheriting Bitcoin security, I think there's certainly a case to be made there that Stacks is an L2.
Okay. And then I guess like for people that aren't familiar with Stacks, can you kind of explain like how the peg in, peg out mechanism works, like to get from Bitcoin to Stacks?
Yeah, sure thing. So sBTC is a way to move Bitcoin into DeFi. It's backed one-to-one with BTC that's held in the sBTC protocol. And so the way that it works is that a user would send L1 Bitcoin transaction. It's a Taproot transaction. And the Stacks validators are running a Stacks node and a Bitcoin node. So they're able to see that that transaction has occurred. And then at that point, they mint sBTC at a one-to-one ratio on the Stacks network. And from that point, the user is fully able to use that in DeFi. You have access to faster transactions, more expressive smart contracts, and a wide range of decentralized applications.
Okay, cool. And then like when you say DeFi, like do you mean like pretty much anything that someone could do like with an Ethereum smart contract, you can do it on Bitcoin with Stacks?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
Amazing.
so we're seeing a lot of use cases around decentralized trading and exchange. There are teams building everything from sort of the more traditional automated market maker dexes that you see on Ethereum, perp dexes. Lending and borrowing is a popular use cases. There's several teams that are working on new lending models that actually improve on what we've seen in Ethereum. And really the goal is how do we bring a lot of the innovation that's happened across Ethereum and bring that back to Bitcoin to unlock the 1.3 trillion in capital that is either sitting on centralized exchanges or sitting idle in cold storage.
Okay. And then like what kind of traction are you guys seeing? Like it's always kind of been my personal opinion that a lot of Bitcoin people kind of shy away from these Ethereum use cases. I don't know if that's due to tribalism because like the communities are kind of siloed, I guess you would say. But it seems to me like the use cases that Ethereum has pioneered, like a lot of Bitcoiners maybe are I wouldn't say like unaware, but like maybe uninterested in those use cases. And then with Ethereum, like the same thing kind of goes like where they have gone full like DeFi and like smart contracts, decentralized platforms. And like those kind of use cases, I think like they would shy away from trying to do something similar on Bitcoin. So like, do you see like with Stacks, like offering these like Ethereum like capabilities being kind of something that Bitcoiners are kind of standoffish towards, or are they embracing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of the reason why Bitcoiners haven't fully embraced DeFi on Ethereum is that it's a completely external system, right?
Mm,
Ethereum doesn't have any sort of recognition or capabilities around Bitcoin itself, whereas Stacks was really purpose made for the goal of actually activating the Bitcoin economy. So there are certain features that we've developed to try to make this experience more native. And so the fact that when you're transacting on Stacks, the transactions are able to inherit Bitcoin finality. So
mhm.
the same economic guarantees as the L1. That was a very important design property for us. The fact that Stacks transactions have visibility into Bitcoin state means that developers have some additional capabilities in terms of what you can actually build with Bitcoin. And ultimately, we can create a DeFi ecosystem that is more native to Bitcoin itself, right? So, we can abstract away certain aspects of transacting on the L2 so that ideally the user only needs to really interact with Bitcoin. And so I think that maybe that's one of the reasons why, we've been able to develop a really active developer community that's been growing, especially over the past 12 to 18 months since Taproot and ordinals really activated. Obviously, the space around Bitcoin L2s and the Bitcoin ecosystem has been growing quickly. Stacks has been really a huge beneficiary of that because it's now clear what is possible to be built on Bitcoin. And I think that approach that we made early on has been very helpful in sort of developing that sort of community and developer traction.
Okay. You've said something about Taproot twice now that's very, very interesting to me because before the interview started, we were talking about how about 2 years ago I interviewed Brittany and Taproot wasn't a thing then. So like how did Taproot, I guess, improve Stacks and give you guys like an advantage?
Yeah, so Taproot allowed for more flexible smart contract capability on Bitcoin, not fully expressive, right? So they're not fully Turing complete or anything, but it allows for more functionality. And so when in building sBTC, the fact that we can build with a pay to Taproot transaction allowed us to actually unlock that capability that we needed for like threshold signatures on Bitcoin. And so
Okay.
that's really is part of what enabled sBTC.
So sBTC, how would you explain it? I guess like would you characterize it more as like a wrapped Bitcoin or something kind of?
Yeah, it's a wrapped Bitcoin asset. But the key difference there, when you hear of wrapped Bitcoin, you think of basically wrapped Bitcoin, which is custodied by BitGo. on
Okay.
Ethereum. And so, there are some pretty key differences there, mainly being that in wrapped Bitcoin, there's one central custodian there. It's maintained by BitGo, and in many ways, I think that is antithetical to the way that many Bitcoiners see the space. Right? They look for
Hmm.
more decentralized alternatives to that, and so that's really how we built sBTC. And so instead of relying on one central custodian or even a small federation of multi-sig, we have developed a decentralized protocol to enable you to use Bitcoin and DeFi. And so as of today, we have around 30 institutional validators on the network that essentially receive a shard of a private key that's able to secure the flow of Bitcoin into and out of the protocol. And so by taking this more decentralized approach, I think that is, really a key difference between sBTC and some of the other wrapped assets that we see on the market.
Okay. And like, say I convert some Bitcoin to sBTC, like once I have it on the Stacks protocol, what can I do with it? Like, what kind of DeFi opportunities are there? You mentioned that there's like lending. You mentioned that there's like DEXs. Are there NFTs? Like, what kind of DeFi experience are you guys offering?
There are, yeah, I think that DeFi is definitely the most popular use case. So we talk to a lot of Bitcoin holders and investors. I think by far the number one thing that people want to do with their Bitcoin is to borrow against it so that they can
Mhm.
access fiat, either to access leverage or to um, just be able to have dollars and not have to incur a capital gains event for it, right? So maybe they want to borrow against their Bitcoin to purchase real estate or some other real assets with it. And so I think that lending and borrowing is going to be a important first use case. We're looking at a lot of opportunities for new yield generation on Bitcoin. And so, can we offer an opportunity to earn a sustainable yield paid in BTC to Bitcoin holders? So I think that is going to be one way that we're able to really activate a lot of this Bitcoin capital that right now is just sitting idle, right? And
Mhm.
so instead of it just sitting in cold storage, you can actually put it to work, start earning a yield on it or borrowing against it. So that's really where the first use cases that we're excited about are going to come from.
Okay. And then like, how do smart contracts work in Stacks? Are you guys using like Solidity or like a EVM compatible like virtual machine? Like how does all that work?
Yeah, so we're actually not an EVM chain. So Stacks has developed its own virtual machine. It's called
Okay.
Clarity. And Clarity was designed with some very intentional properties to try to improve over the EVM. So the first thing is that Clarity has some additional security features that Solidity lacks. So first of
Mhm.
all, it is an interpreted language, not a compiled language. So that means that when you're actually looking at a block explorer, you can see exactly what the code is going to do, right? And so it's a more of a transparent language in that respect. We have certain features like post condition. So if you're interacting with a smart contract, using a wallet, the wallet can tell you exactly what a smart contract is going to do before it executes. That's a really nice security property that we find that developers tend to like a lot. And lastly, Clarity has visibility into Bitcoin state, which means that developers can basically write smart contracts to react to certain activities that happen on the L1. And so with that, there's just a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can actually build on Bitcoin. So ultimately, we wanted to improve over the EVM and offer a better experience there.
Okay. And with Clarity, like, is Stacks the only project that's using Clarity, or are there like other projects that are also employing the same smart contract language?
Yeah, so Stacks developed the language. As far as
Uh-huh.
I know, it's the only one that is using it today.
And how does that affect like compatibility? Like, I imagine there's like bridges from Stacks that go to like Ethereum or other Web3 chains. Like, does that impact compatibility in any way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that from my experience, developers have a little bit more of a learning curve getting up to speed on Clarity than, say, Solidity. But once they do, they tend to appreciate a lot of the features that we talked about previously. And so, and in terms of compatibility itself, we actually haven't had too many challenges with that. When you look at Stacks today, we have integrations with all the top exchanges pretty much. A lot of the custodians and Bitcoin wallets are native to the Stacks ecosystem. And so, I think that the uptick there has been fairly strong. We are also, I should mention, looking at ways to add additional programming languages to Stacks as well. So we have an initiative that we're working on at Labs, which is to make Stacks compatible with WebAssembly. And
Okay.
so that means that we can have additional runtime. So we're looking at adding Rust as a first-class citizen to Stacks as well, and basically trying to meet developers where they are. So we want to be able to provide the best developer experience on Stacks. I think it's very clear that developers want the optionality to deploy smart contracts in the languages that they're familiar with. And so that's our initiative to basically meet developers with where they're at and give them more choice in terms of what they're deploying with.
Cool. So like once you guys add Rust, like what kind of extra capabilities will that add to Stacks?
Yeah, it's a good question. It basically means that you can write a Rust smart contract that compiles directly to the Stacks blockchain. So you can write smart contracts directly in Rust.
Is it a side chain? Like, would you consider it like a layer 2 or like a layer 3? Like, I know like it's kind of hazy on definitions and stuff like that, but would you say that it's like a side chain, or would you say like it's like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier too.
Yeah.
I think that in many ways the definition of an L2 becomes very hazy
Yes.
because of some of the strict definitions. Like if we're looking at some of the strict definitions of what is an L2, Lightning is the only chain that is able to offer unilateral exit. But and so in some regards, I do think that Stacks has a separate consensus mechanism that is what you would expect in a sidechain. The key difference is, as we talked about earlier, is that by actually inheriting Bitcoin security, and the security of the Bitcoin base chain, you start to exhibit some of the properties that you expect in an L2. So it's kind of fuzzy. I think that getting caught up into the definitions of is an L2, it's a side chain. It's sometimes like a little bit in the weeds. The main phrasing that I think we like to use is that it's a Bitcoin layer, right? It is,
Okay.
when we look at the Bitcoin ecosystem, Bitcoin is this like really secure foundation. It's a great settlement layer, and then basically we're seeing layers built on top, and those layers include rollups, they include side chains, and many other sorts of models for that, right? And so, instead of trying to define exactly what it is in those terms, just say it's a Bitcoin layer. It's
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, like another thing you just brought up, like the roll-ups, like there's a whole plethora of Bitcoin like L2s that are coming out now that are kind of offering this DeFi, like Ethereum style smart contracting experience. But you guys have kind of been the pioneers. You guys have been around. I think maybe Rootstock was before Stacks, but you guys have been around for a few years. Like you've been around for a while. So, like, how are you guys seeing this whole like push for like layer 2s and roll-ups and this kind of stuff since you guys are now kind of established?
Yeah, I think it's super positive, right? Because basically what we've seen is that with all of the new Bitcoin layers, Bitcoin projects that are launching, it is growing the overall category, right? Where for years it was mainly Stacks, Rootstock, and Lightning as the three main projects that were trying to push the boundaries of Bitcoin innovation and scalability. Now we're seeing a lot more projects coming into the space. That means that I think that it increases the size of the overall addressable market. I think that a lot of these teams are doing interesting things on Bitcoin that is positive for the entire Bitcoin layer space. But I think that when we look at some of the properties of Stacks, it's really helped us to differentiate in this market, right? And so instead of being the 12th EVM roll up on Bitcoin, We have a slightly different model where we've taken very intentional design choices. We have a unique consensus mechanism called proof of transfer that's able to offer these unique features for Bitcoin. And so that's really the approach that we've taken there. And I think also the fact that we've been building in the space for years now. As I mentioned, the mainnet launched in 2021. We've been able to build a certain amount of credibility in the space as being long-term builders. I think that we are building for a 5-10 year time horizon. And so, I think that is another one of the things that, people look at Stacks and I think it's clear that, Stacks is here to stay, right? Because we've been building in this space over the past several years, and we've kind of built up that track record already compared to some of the newer projects that are entering into the space.
I would agree. I would say you guys are pioneers for sure. Would you say that you guys are working towards like building interoperability with some of these other L2s? Like, are you guys like, I don't know, like Bob, for example, like Build on Bitcoin? Like, are you guys like trying to integrate with like any of these other projects like that?
Yeah, I think interoperability is super important, right? Because you don't want to be building on an island. You want to have bridges to different L1s and L2s. And so actually, one of our biggest focuses in terms of the go-to-market is bridging to other L1s. And so just over the past couple of weeks, we've announced partnerships with both Solana and Aptos. And the thinking there is that we can, because sBTC has the best trust assumptions and is a more decentralized Bitcoin asset, this is a value add that we can add to other chains as well that don't want to rebuild the entire bridge. And so with that, partnering with other L1s that are also non-EVM compatible, getting distribution there where there is interest in using Bitcoin and DeFi, that can help to grow the network effects of sBTC, which ultimately reinforce value back to Stacks. And so to answer your question directly, having bridges to a range of both L1 networks and Bitcoin L2s is certainly very important.
And how would you say like the Web3 community, like the Ethereum native users that are like loving smart contracts and DeFi and all that kind of stuff, like how do they view Stacks? Like, do they view it as a serious contender in Web3?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think that speaks to the traction that we've been able to have over the past couple of years. And so, what I tend to find is that in a lot of these ecosystems, there are a lot of Bitcoiners, but for a long time, they have not had the tools to be able to build on Bitcoin and interact with Bitcoin the way that they want to in DeFi. And so my impression is that it's very refreshing to see for these people to in other ecosystems to see projects that are bringing some innovation back to Bitcoin and want to see new use cases for their BTC.
For our listeners, like that may not be familiar with Stacks, like say I have some Bitcoin, like how would I convert that to sBTC? How would I like, I guess, navigate myself to the Stacks ecosystem?
Yeah, so the first thing that you would do, so I described the bridging process earlier. So there's going to be, the sBTC web application that will allow you to bridge directly into sBTC. But really, this capability is going to exist in all of the Stacks wallets and applications directly. Right. And so if you are a Leather wallet user or an Xverse wallet user and you're transacting with ordinals and other Bitcoin applications directly in those wallets, you'll be able to bridge to sBTC directly from the wallet, and you won't even have to go into the web application. So we're trying to make that process as easy as possible for Bitcoiners to onboard into the ecosystem and kind of meet them where they're at. I think also what you can expect is that a lot of the Stacks ecosystem applications are going to have that capability embedded directly. And so let's say you wanted to take out a loan directly on a platform, let's say like Zest or like Granite. you can actually send an L1 Bitcoin transaction, and basically under the hood, these platforms can bridge that into sBTC and then execute a smart contract that can deliver USDC directly to your wallet. And so we've been trying to look at the ways that we can really make it as easy as possible for Bitcoiners to onboard into the ecosystem.
You mentioned runes and ordinals just a moment ago. Like, how do you guys view that, considering that like it's kind of like a hacky way to do like smart contract stuff, and you guys have actually built like a platform that's intended for smart contract stuff? Do you view runes as kind of like, or ordinals kind of like, I don't know, like a poor effort to do what you guys are already accomplishing?
No, actually, I look at it as so my high level framework for this is that we're going to see a lot of asset issuance happening on the Bitcoin L1. And then trading will happen on L2s. And the reason for that is that when you are let's say minting an ordinal or a rune, you have the full provenance of the Bitcoin L1, and but you're still limited by a lot of the properties of Bitcoin itself, right? So the actual trading experience is still very clunky. It's not easy to build an AMM directly on Bitcoin. There's no smart contracts. Transactions take at least 10 minutes to settle. And so I think what we're going to see is that after like assets like runes and ordinals are issued on Bitcoin, they're actually going to be traded on platforms like Stacks. And there are teams working on this today, essentially also bridging in your runes and being able to trade them on Stacks trading platforms that make that process a lot easier.
You know how like if you're minting like a ordinal or something, the Bitcoin fees can be very, very expensive. Is transacting on Stacks like super cheap, like equivalent to like Lightning Network or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's essentially what you can expect. Contract call and Stacks should be like less than like 30 cents, I think, is the average right now. So yes, it's very cheap, and then importantly on the speed, right? And so with this upcoming Nakamoto upgrade, the transaction on Stacks will receive finality in a fraction of the time. And so, transactions will take roughly 10 to 20 seconds on average.
Wow.
And so, I think that user experience improvement, as opposed to waiting for 10-minute blocks, is going to drive a lot of activity to transacting on L2.
Okay. And then like if somebody wanted to issue a token in the Stacks ecosystem, how could they do so?
So Stacks has a token standard called SIP10. It's essentially just a fungible token standard that would allow anyone to create new assets on Stacks. If you're familiar with ERC20, it's essentially the equivalent token standard on Stacks. It's just as simple.
Okay, cool. And then like if you issue like a token on Stacks, like people do with ERC20s, like there's DEXs and like platforms that you could like trade it on in a decentralized fashion.
Yeah, for sure. There's a few great ones we can talk about. Bitflow is one of the most popular DEXs on Stacks right now. They've also developed a liquidity aggregator, which means that they're actually pulling the best price execution from platforms like Valar and like Alex. And so they have a good user experience there. And then Valar is another great example of basically building the first perp DEX on Bitcoin. And so they'll be available on Stacks as soon as the Nakamoto upgrade activates. And so, yeah, there's several DEXs and other DeFi apps where you can actually go and start to put that Bitcoin to work.
And how soon can users expect the Nakamoto upgrade to be implemented?
Yeah, so it's coming up soon. The Nakamoto upgrade will activate on mainnet in the first half of October. I believe the developers are still finalizing the exact block height, but it should be in the second week of October.
Amazing. That's right when this interview is probably going to air, to be honest.
Awesome. Right on time.
Yeah. So I guess like what are you most excited about in the Stacks ecosystem? Like for people that aren't familiar with Stacks, like what is really like what inspires you to stay involved?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the idea that Bitcoin is the best form of money that we have, but it's still been limited in its ability to fulfill its role as both a medium of exchange and a unit of account. And so I want to see Bitcoin actually used because it is the best form of money. And I think that Stacks, by providing faster transaction times with low fees and more smart contracts, we can actually see Bitcoin used as a medium of exchange, in addition to being the best store of value that we have. So I'm really excited about activating the full potential of Bitcoin to be used both for payments, for DeFi, and all of the use cases that we talked about so far on this call. And yeah, I think that Stacks has a big role to play in that.
Yeah, I think so too. Andre, we're running out of time. How can people follow you on social media? How can they follow Stacks? How can they keep up with the latest developments? How can they find out when the Nakamoto upgrade is implemented and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so you can follow me directly. It's at Andre R. Serrano on X. You can also follow the Stacks handle. It's just at Stacks. All of the most up-to-date information on Stacks will be coming out directly from that handle. So that's definitely a good place to follow along. You can also go to bitcoinrights.com. I write a regular blog post on updates on Stacks and Bitcoin. So that's another good place to stay up to date.
And for the developers out there, like if they wanted to build something on Stacks, like are there resources for developers that are looking to build on Stacks?
Yeah, of course. We have a ton of resources in the docs and probably others. Maybe I can send this to you after and include in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Andre, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you about Stacks.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. Talk to you soon.